Welcome to Loving God and Loving Life. Here in 2 Corinthians 10, we find the theme being Paul defending his authority. And that's the theme of the chapter. But in the middle of the chapter, and you got to be careful about pulling something out of its context, but there's a verse here in 3 and 4 that I've heard used in some wild ways. Paul says that we are humans, but we do not wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons. Well, I've heard people, that jump in and talk about the weapons of our warfare. I listened to one guy. He recorded himself in an airplane as he was supposedly fighting spirits in the heavenlies, and using this verse, saying, "I'm using God's mighty weapons." Gang, the whole chapter, the whole book, is Paul revealing that God's mighty weapons are sacrificial service. And yes, is warring in prayer part of God's mighty weapons? Absolutely. But what is that? Gang, if you ever give yourself to prayer, it's another act of sacrificial service for God's people or for people that you love. It's not a self-exalting thing. It's sacrificing myself to pray and to lift up others and to lift up Christ. Now, if that's your view of prayer and your view of warfare, home run. You're knocking it out of the park. Don't get off in some of the wildest, goofiest things. Paul was just simply saying that these other false apostles, they came in using worldly weapons, which so happen to be the exact worldly weapons that are today. The manipulation, success, smooth words, lording it over others with authority, and that perception of power. Those are all the things Paul's been addressing, all those things throughout this entire book. That's exactly what he's talking about here. The worldly weapons are exactly those things. God's weapons are the sacrificial service that he's been talking about through the entire book. Prayer is a part of that, for sure. He starts us here in the next chapter, chapter 11, is where Paul gives this big, long list of all of the massive difficulties and sacrifices he made. He's about to reveal God's mighty weapons, and it was a life laid down for Christ. Those are God's mighty weapons. God, thank you that we fight to advance your kingdom with a sacrificial heart to serve you. God, give us grace to serve you well. Friends, let's trust God. God, send us one person today to share your love with. I hope you realize, friends, you're asking God to help you in warfare. You're asking God to help you sacrifice, to share his love with somebody else. That's spiritual warfare right there. Friends, let's never forget it. It's in that sacrificial life of loving and giving and serving that we end up with a life that we love.